You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. It is an offshoot of the Digital Escape Podcast. I'm here with my good buddy, Lord Uther. Lord Uther, how are you doing?
Doing great. How about you, my friend?
Doing fantastic. Really excited for today's episode. I mean, I'm jazzed, man. This is probably, well, it is. It's my favorite Star Trek movie that we're going to be talking about today. And of course, that is Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. I think it's controversial for me to say it's my favorite Star Trek movie just because the movie itself is a bit controversial, but what do you do? But to kick us off, I just wanted to toss it out there that our website is live, digitalescapepod.com. The Warp Core Podcast is our YouTube exclusive podcast, so you will not get this anywhere else. We are only available on YouTube, Digital Escape Podcast. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Hit that notification button so you can stay up to date with all things Digital Escape Podcast, but especially with the Warp Core Podcast. Again, we are only available here on YouTube, and that is a gift to you from us. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening. I have to start off with The Voyage Home as being the first time I watched a Star Trek movie and loved it from beginning to end. I remember seeing The Wrath of Khan as a kid, and I had a hard time getting past the earwig. The little Crawley scene, like, you know, again, I was probably too young when I saw it, but, like, just, phew, that was scary. And I don't know that I actually saw The Search for Spock until I was an adult. I think I saw Wrath of Khan and The Voyage Home, and then The Undiscovered Country, and then Generations, and the new Next Generation ones. So, to catch us up, at the end of Search for Spock, they bring Spock back to Vulcan on the stolen bird of prey, and he has to get his mind basically back. It's starting to come back to him. He remembers Jim. He remembers the end of Star Trek II, basically, kind of recites that line again that just doesn't seem to be going away. And beginning of Star Trek IV, they've repaired the bird of prey. They've decided that they're going to make a voyage back home to Earth and, you know, face the consequences of their actions. You know, they stole the Enterprise. The Enterprise was destroyed. Now, in the meantime, Mystery Probe disables all these ships, gets to Earth, and now it's looking like Earth's in deep, deep shit. And, you know, unbeknownst to the gallant crew of the Enterprise, that was given 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And tricked General Krug. You know, I think immediately the cool thing about this movie is it did feel a lot like an episode of Star Trek again. But it was still connected to this greater Genesis story arc. And, you know, it brings you in the way a Next Generation episode brings you in, like, gives you that cold open teaser, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, oh man, you know, the crew of the Enterprise are virtually fugitives. Like, what's going on? Like, how are they going to get home? They're in this Klingon ship, and, you know, the only Klingon they had is, you know, basically in custody, you know, and now Scotty's got to figure out the whole ship, and they've made this decision to kind of go face these consequences. And this whole thing's going on. Now they have to deal with it. And that's I think, from the mindset of a first-time watcher through Next Generation, that's what caught me, was that this felt a lot like an episode of Next Generation, where there's some great calamity that's threatening the Federation or threatening the planet or whatever, and the crew of the ship has to tackle it. And whatever you think about the overall movie itself, it's a very fresh feeling for this original series crew. It's definitely something just, I don't know. To me, it's just something more potent in a way that, like, it's exploring this new territory of, a non-known calamity. Not like V'ger was kind of in that same vein, but that really, it had less to do about V'ger and a lot more to do about the characters and their interactions, and trying to bring them back into the fold of the original series and kind of re-energize the franchise. It wasn't like
Right.
it wasn't like setting up a calamity that they needed to fix necessarily, because the actual calamity part there was a very small aspect of the storytelling. Whereas this movie, the calamity is like the whole movie. Everything they do is to resolve this central conflict. And then all of the Genesis arc story and the interactions between the characters become sort of secondary, but still play on the main stage. And I think just as a conceptual and structural viewpoint of this movie, I think this is very interesting. And that's, for me, it's my favorite, so I could gush about this all day. But for me, that's what really intrigues me the most. Is it's this finality, it's this continuation of the storyline, but it's also a fresh perspective on how a Star Trek movie or a Star Trek episode can progress.
Now that you're bringing it up that way, I'm starting to feel a little bit differently, because I was going to take out a big bag of shredded cheese and just spread it all over this movie, because I felt like it was incredibly Star Trek cheesy. But the way you're talking about this movie reminds me of Star Trek Next Generation Insurrection, which is one of my favorite movies because of the Next Gen movies, because it was an episode. It was a long episode of a Next Gen season, in my opinion, and that's why I just loved it. And it's funny now. I'm seeing some parallels here, right? You Insurrection had a lot of different little comedy pieces, especially with Data. You're seeing that here with Spock. You're getting a little more comedy from him because he's relearning his brain and he's, interacting with humans more, not from his century, right? So, seeing a lot of pieces there, I never really viewed it. Viewing in that context changes it for me. And right now it's funny because I'm watching the Undiscovered Country. I'm towards the end of it, so my mind's veering towards that one a little bit more. But I do like the idea of seeing them trying to figure out this Klingon ship. I thought that was pretty cool. Now we're going to do time travel, so we're going to see some of that. Which again, when you talk to Trekkies or Trekkers, whatever you want to call yourselves, I don't care. Just people that love Star Trek. They like Star Trek 4 because and a lot of what I would read about or hear about was the comedy piece that came along with it. That there was more laughs than before. There's the one line,
double dumbass on you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was, yes. Or the punk rock guy with the boombox and he knocks him out. Or there's a line from there that my buddy, who I call the Scott God all the time on our podcast, where the computer, hello computer, and he's like, just use the keyboard, and then he picks up the mouse and he does it right. Like, that's a line my buddy and I say all the time. So there are a lot of funny parts that come out of that. I also like the continued development, which again, I know we said we're going to go back and look at this when we watch the original episodes of the Bones, Spock, Kirk, or Tritaverates, whatever we want to call it, but seeing that dynamic continue to grow with them, and McCoy just giving Spock a hard time and giving him a lot of shit again. Like we're starting to see more of that, which I like that piece of it too. But then we're back to the good old, Kirk, and I do kind of like that towards the end of the movie. You're thinking like he's going to have this love interest, and she kind of just walks away from him. And I absolutely love that, and I love that look of rejection on his face when that happened as well. So there are a lot of different pieces here that, now that we're talking through it a little bit more, I think I'm appreciating appreciating it a little bit more, and again, not just spreading that bag of cheese all over it the way I wanted to start with. And we can talk about. It's funny because I sent you a message when I was on the Dreadmill about spoiler alert, when they're flying in at the end of the movie and there's a new Enterprise just sitting there. How did that happen? Like, it just came out of nowhere. You tell me in 4 months they built a new Enterprise, or they had no idea a new Enterprise was going to be commissioned. Like, they had no clue. So I get it, and a lot of people will say, well, writers' prerogative on that to make that happen and to keep them going on on an Enterprise, obviously. So again, I know for you, like you said, this is kind of your number one movie. It's a little more mid-tier for me, and let me tell you, they skimped on the special effects for this one too. Not like they needed a whole bunch of them for this one as much, but you really kind of saw some of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you bring that up, because I think the first 5 Star Trek original series movies all have that same issue, right? Where it's the special effects are kind of an Achilles heel. Like, some are better than others, but they're all still pretty, like, even for the time, a little cheap. And even though they were fairly expensive effects, like, they didn't commit the amount of budget that, like, you would even expect from a sci-fi movie of the era. I think of 2001. A lot of those effects were practical, but they were spectacular. And these movies kind of, they don't have a lot of that. But then in Star Trek, in Undiscovered Country,
yeah.
Well, right. But then in Undiscovered Country, they put a lot of money into special effects, and I think it actually cheapens the experience of the movie.
Oh, wow!
Because some of those are pretty bad. And especially now, they look real dated.
Right.
But we can talk about that when we get to Star Trek 6. But I think, because the crux of the movie is the time travel bit, and I think it's because they do that on the original series. They time travel in the original series.
Yeah.
There's a couple of times that the Kirk's Enterprise does it, and they talk about it in later series as well. But the interesting thing about how this movie plays out is it's very topical. It's very, it's very of the period in terms of what they're talking about. The extinction of the whales, and Leonard Nimoy wrote the movie, if I remember right, and he was deeply environmentalist and wanted to bring awareness to this whole situation with whales and extinction and pollution and all that. And I think, not only is that like a very nice poignant thing that I think is true to Roddenberry's original vision for Star Trek, but it also offers them an opportunity to kind of do what I think the series, whether it's the original series or Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine, what they want to do all the time is put those characters with their knowledge of the future in the current era, or in an era of Earth, whether it's the 20s with Picard, or turn of the century in the original series in Trelane, or period pieces like Irish Revolution in Voyager, or things of that nature, or World War II. There's always these things that are coming up in the series. Finally, they get to do it, and they choose just to drop them in modern day San Francisco.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, which is kind of cheesy because it's a fairly conflict-free area, right? There's some counterculture going on with like the punk rocker on the bus. There's some, environmentalism versus like, not really environmentalism, just with the dynamic between, now her name's escaping me.
The doctor, right?
Yeah, the doctor and her like boss with the goofy 80s haircut who says, "I didn't want to alarm you. They took him last night," and she slaps him in the face. He's kind of like more businessy and she's more scientific and environmental, and there's the dynamic with the Russians, and probably has to be like the funniest thing is dropping Walter Koenig in the nuclear ship, and having him get caught, and it's just interesting. Like they bring in all of the topical parts of the current day, but it's not like in the series when they drop him into Nazi Germany, or they put him into Roaring Twenties gangster scenarios. Those are very like I don't even know how to put it, like overly caricatured, and this is just real ass life, and they're the caricatures. So like the humor part of it is just, it's hysterical, but it's also it's relevant. It's topically relevant. Like they would be like that if this actually happened. It wouldn't be like Picard and Data going into a gangster town with Tommy guns. It would be them like awkwardly sort of grouping around and trying to figure out where they can get some money, and
right.
Understand how currency works. Is $100 a lot? Like, I mean, this is all like it's such a beautiful film because it does just sort of like plop him into real life. Like, what would Kirk do if he were here? Because I guarantee everybody watching the original series had thought to themselves, every Trekkie has probably thought to themselves at one time or another, what would it be like if Kirk just like appeared, or if Uhura was here, and or if Chekhov was here, especially in the Cold War, if Chekhov was just here and had this no knowledge of the reality of the Cold War and just being a Russian person walking around downtown San Francisco, not knowing how to get to Alameda or what Alameda is when you're in San Francisco. Like the humor aspect is so wonderful, but it's so, I mean, even now, 40 years removed, roughly, even now it's, which is mind blowing. I can't believe that that's the case, but even now it's so, it feels so real. Like it's the past for us now, but like we all of a certain generation like can put ourselves there and be like, holy shit, like that is exactly how this would play out, whereas I feel like other Star Trek movies, like they have elements of that comedy and that reality and borrowing themes that's really concretized the idea of literally every thematic element they were going for. And I think that's what makes it so endearing and enduring. I mean, it's just it's lasted this long as such a popular film, even with its cheesy special effects, because it represents exactly what I think everybody in that era would have thought would happen with the Enterprise crew if they were just plopped in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also really liked when Chekhov they were going to do surgery on him to relieve the bleeding on the brain or the pressure on his brain, and McCoy gets in there. He's like, "What's wrong with you?" Or the one person was on dialysis, and he just gives her a pill, but and all of a sudden, like her kidneys were
Doctor
fine,
gave
right?
me a new pill, and I got a new kidney.
Yeah, new kidney, and then he just puts that thing on Chekhov's head, and all of a sudden, he's fine, or he was going to be fine, and I think it's one of the things that's always drawn me to Star Trek is the idea of getting better as humans and having hope, and and I used to talk to my students a lot about this as well, because when I would talk about the Civil War, and I would say during the Civil War there was a huge leap in like medicine during the Civil War, and there was a huge leap in medicine during World War II, and I said, but at the time they thought it was advanced. Like the idea of hacking off a person's arm that had been shot, they thought that was advanced medicine. Or when they developed syringes, like that was advanced medicine, right? Or when they had antibiotics for World War II, that was advanced medicine. And I go, but looking back on it, we think they were like savages, right? And that's kind of what McCoy's saying, like, you guys are barbaric. You're savages with what you're doing. This is all it really takes.
The Dark Ages?
Yeah, the Dark Ages, and I think that's one of the core things about Star Trek is the idea of hope. I've also heard some people kind of allude to or flat out say, like, Roddenberry was talking about communism, like that was the idea behind Star Trek, and it's not. And no, I think his idea was hope for the human race, like that we could all unite behind something and get better. Which brings me to another point that I used to talk to my students a lot about, which was, could you imagine, and this is not a political comment, this is just quite, to me, it's a human comment. Can you imagine if we didn't put so much money into developing things to hurt and kill each other, and we put money into things to develop ourselves as a human race, where we would be at right now? We could be a lot further along if we use those things to be better, right? And I think that's one of the points, and it's kind of, and what I'm saying this because of that whole McCoy scene. It could be better. It could be better. And I think that's what Roddenberry was almost always getting at. Think about the crew in general. I mean, you have an African-American woman. You have someone from, whatever area of the world you want to call that, because I don't want to be, from the Asian continent or from Eurasia. You've got someone from Russia in a sense, right? Pavel Chekhov. Like, you've got all these people on this bridge, and it was such a revolutionary thought at the time. But I think Roddenberry's whole process was we're better because of it. Like, you're better. And I think that is something
right.
that was a part of that movie as well.
And that was interesting because, in the 80s, when they travel back to the 80s, a lot of the progress of the original series was just sort of there. Like we'd kind of gotten beyond a lot of that. Obviously not, but it part of the reason that a lot of them being in San Francisco felt so natural is because there was not really judgment. You were dressed goofy in San Francisco, whether you were Asian or black or foreign of any kind, or just some old white dude. You totally accepted. Nobody stopped in the streets and stared at him. They were just there. It's like San Francisco. Weird stuff happens here. We're San Franciscans. We get it.
Right.
And it demonstrates kind of a pretty big leap, just in how we interpret those characters in real life. And I think you're spot on with Roddenberry's point of hope for the future, because I think what we see with Star Trek, and this is again where I think Star Trek separates itself from Star Wars, is that there is this continual, rapid change for the better for humanity's sake, and then eventually for the Federation's sake, and then for the greater galaxy's sake. And that is just, learning to accept those who are different, and how easy it is to deviate from that path. I think that's where a show like Picard really takes an interesting viewpoint of that. I don't want to spoil anything, and we'll eventually get to Picard, but this movie kind of, it's at that crux, that turning point, and we'll see that in Star Trek V, Star Trek VI, that the Federation is changing, and it starts with this moment of absolute crisis, where they realize that the sins of the past had not been absolved, and they're righting an old wrong by admitting their mistakes and finding a way to fix it. And that's a really powerful message that I think gets lost in some of the overt messaging of this movie, and it does tie back to that same idea of, as long as we acknowledge that we've done something regrettable or something bad or wrong, it's that little kid thing. If you own up to it, you can't take it back, but you might be able to find a way to make things better. And when we think about Roddenberry's vision as hope, just think about the way humanity changes with Zefram Cochrane. It becomes that everybody puts all of their resources into developing this humanity, peace rather than one person's wealth or one country's power. And that's where, the crew of the Enterprise put everything on the line for personal gain in Star Trek 3. And they lost. They lost David. They lost the Genesis planet. They did get Spock back, but they're now looking at potentially losing their careers. We're going to end up in a spice mine or
Right.
whatever McCoy says.
Right.
Yeah, Urapente.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's like, they're basically saying, hey, we've made a mistake, but we need to go back. We need to own up for it. We're doing this as a crew. We're admitting our mistakes, and we're going to go back. But then the sins of the past have already come back to haunt Earth. All right, we're still owning up for what we're doing, but we need to right this ancient wrong and own up to what has brought us to this crisis period. And they do it, and they're successful. But they still pay the consequences of their own personal actions because it's a betterment of humanity, it's a betterment of themselves, and ultimately it's their character. It's what they represent as true Starfleet officers. I mean, that core value of Roddenberry's vision of Starfleet, vision of the future, is that you accept your mistakes for the interest of bettering the circumstances of the many. The good of the many outweighs the good of the few or the one. That is the crux of, I think, this whole Genesis story arc.
Yeah.
And they're bringing that to a whole new front. And I just think about the rapid change for the better that we see from Zefram Cochrane. Now that we know the whole story, I mean, we'll get to those movies later, but like through the original series, Captain Pike was just getting used to a woman on the bridge. Although Strange New Worlds twists that a little bit.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing. But you see in the original series, Kirk is sort of this womanizer. Sometimes accidentally, but like for the most part, there's these character flaws that in the movies they're living them out. They're living out the consequences of the things they've done in the past, and they have this new wise perspective that comes with age, because they deal with age pretty much from the jump. In Star Trek 1,
yeah,
and now in Star Trek 4, visually they have aged tremendously. I mean, it's especially with Scotty, it's really noticeable, and it's speaking to those same themes, movie after movie, and continuing those stories. That's true to Star Trek in that you're watching the evolution of a crew in a TV series, in this movie series. It's this more grandiose continuation, and I think that's why Star Trek 4 is so potent, is because they're acknowledging their mortality in new ways. With Chekhov almost dying.
Yeah.
McCoy saving lives just accidentally because of virtue of the future they come from. Changing technologies but providing transparent aluminum. How do we know he didn't invent the thing?
I love that line.
It's all this it's all this progressive change that's just like it does get back to that central theme of hope, but also that central theme of ownership and doing for the good of the many. Even though they know they may be sacrificing their lives to do this or to attempt to fix these sins of the past, they also know they're still owning up for their most immediate transgressions. And they're still doing it because that is what a good Starfleet officer would do. And I think that's, it's what a good human would do. A good human would do these things. They would own up to their mistakes. And they would try to better the circumstances of those around them, even if they knew they were still going to have some consequences they had to deal with for whatever they did. That the whole Star Trek vision, I think, speaks to that aspect of humanity, that if we would just own up to the fact that we're not perfect and try to fix our mistakes on an individual and a group level, things would be better, to the point of where major crises could be tackled and resolved by doing that. And that's that's really the message of this movie. I mean, in a nutshell, is just that if we just work together and admit our mistakes and try to make things better, things will get better. It might not be the easiest road. You might have to do a loop around the sun, but you will get it done.
I don't know how to follow that, but yeah. I mean, spot on with that, without a doubt. With all that being said, and talking about that vision, I also do like at the end, they're all found not guilty except for I can't even remember what the one charge was that they not, basically
disobeying a direct order.
Yeah. So, Kirk saves the universe. Well, the crew saves the universe again. And which makes me wonder how many Starfleet captains have saved the universe, or if it was just always Kirk doing that. But with all that being said, how do they get him back on the Enterprise? They bust him down from Admiral to Captain, which is where we always know he should have been anyway. And we always knew that was his path. And he deep down inside, he always knew that was his path as well, right? So that's going to get him back onto this incredibly quickly built, 1701A, and on to new adventures, right? That's the whole idea, is to kind of they tie up that, like you said, that three story arc, or 3 movie arc, and tie it up with a little bow by literally the bow is the Enterprise sitting there waiting for them as they're coming back, and they're ready to continue on. They're going to continue into a very weak movie, which, there's that old, I don't know if you've heard this, the odd number Star Trek movies are usually the worst and the evens are the best. And might see a little bit of evidence of that with Star Trek V. We'll see.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think it's true to a point. But I will say that over time and with age, I've come to appreciate the odd-numbered movies quite a bit more than I ever have. Especially Star Trek VII, which is... It's probably my... I said this one was my favorite, but Generations is definitely my favorite. I can't wait to talk about that one too. But these two, they could interchange for my number one.
Yeah.
But I think I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the interesting moments this movie has with Kirk and Spock, and just palling around on Earth, for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons being the banter. Which you get in the original series, but you haven't up until this point gotten in the movies. And there's a lot of really clever back and forth, especially when they're on their own, walking around, or in the truck. The truck scenes in the truck are just outstanding.
They are.
You boys like Italian? Yes. No. Yes. No. No.
Do I?
Yes. And it's just like, oh my God, like that's what I think every Trekkie has, if we're thinking chronologically here, every Trekkie has always wanted to see that. They have always wanted to see Kirk and Spock in this situation where they're riffing off of each other, and it's just this buddy cop comedy that, it lends itself to the overall story, of course, but it really adds a new dynamic layer that, again, what's awesome about this is, like, these are very established characters. Even at this point, we sort of know Kirk and Spock. This is a whole new side to these guys. It's like, holy shit. How is it after, what was it, 67 when the original series came out? 66?
Yeah, so almost 20 years later, yeah.
Yeah, about 20 years later, we're still learning new aspects of their personalities, And then you see Kirk on what is essentially a first date, at a pizza place.
Right.
And he takes a sip of, like, light beer,
And
he's like,
whoa.
and it's like, oh my god, I mean, what's so lovely about this movie is the comedy, but it's the great part about the comedy isn't necessarily the laughs, but the amazing level of detail that it adds to these characters we've known and loved for years. I mean, obviously I'm coming in retrospect when I'm watching these, but it's like, these characters, how they operate by the time you see this movie, and you get this new dimension that, quite frankly, you don't get again until one really awkward scene in a national park, which every time I watch it, we'll talk about it when we get to that movie, but every time I watch it, I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But it's just cool because, and you get that with McCoy in this movie too, as he's giving Spock just like constant shit, or with McCoy and Scotty, which is an odd couple pairing. You get two odd couple pairings in this movie, which I think is also really fucking cool. Is that McCoy and Scotty at the glass factory, like,
right? Yeah.
And then what is Sulu doing the whole time? He's just like skulking around, looking at an airplane.
The helicopter. Like, yeah.
The helicopter. It's like, it's just odd. It's so weird. And Uhura and Chekhov, like, I mean, just these layers of character that are added to these very well established characters, and then you get to see kind of their real personalities shine through. They're showing a little bit of the actor through the character, I think, and it's kind of a shame because Sulu, of course we all know George Takei is gay. And I'm not saying this to be like homophobic or anything, but Sulu kind of comes across as a gay man in this movie. And I kind of saw that with his interaction with the helicopter pilot. And I thought, how cool would it have been if he had been out at the time and they could have used that
right.
personality to add that to Sulu. I do think it's kind of a bit of a failure on Star Trek's part. And I know that, George Takei didn't come out for many, many years after this, but I do think if ever he was in another Star Trek movie, that would be something really interesting to see through his character. Because you get a little slice of the person behind the mask. A lot of this movie is fourth wall breaking. They plop him into reality, basically. So it's like, that to me would be really cool. It'd be cool to see a little more of who these actors are. I mean, I feel like James Doohan was Scotty. I don't think there was ever a character there. I think that's just who he was.
Right.
And, I think that's what's really neat and starts to shine through. And I don't think you get it as much in Star Trek V and Star Trek VI. But this is kind of their unique opportunity to have fun with what they were doing. Because in Star Trek II, Nimoy wanted out. He was like, I'm done. I don't want to do the Star Trek thing anymore. Star Trek 1, nobody knew they were coming back. Star Trek 2, it's like nobody knew what was going to happen next because who knows what Leonard Nimoy is going to do. And then Star Trek 3, they're just sort of finding their footing. But in Star Trek 4, it's like, look, they've had massive success. Let's have fun with this. Like, what would be interesting? What about something about whales? And it's the first time that I feel like the way Nimoy wrote these characters into this script, it was him writing his friends into this movie. And at the time, I think they were fairly tight-knit. They were friends. There was probably some personality conflicts, as I think they all had. I think James Doohan famously said, Kirk, what a pompous ass. But like, but I think they genuinely had fun and had a good time with each other to the point where, you got a little of that in Star Trek 3 when they stole the Enterprise and it was this moment. But that was part of the movie too. It didn't feel so natural. This movie feels really natural. And I think that's, again, a testament to these actors and how incredibly talented they all are or were. And it can't be celebrated enough that they really let their own personality shine through these characters that you really can't separate the two anymore. And that's where like Nimoy was afraid of that, but thank God he embraced it, because oh my God, like, you know, now you will never ever ever associate Leonard Nimoy with another character, or Nichelle Nichols.
Oh,
and that's not a bad thing. I mean, they could definitely do other things, and most of them did, but that was really just this shine. I think this is one of the reasons why I love this movie. Is it's just this shining moment where there's a great blending of character and actor, and it just feels so fun and natural, without sacrificing the story or, you know, doing obvious fourth wall breaks that I think detract from the process of a film. Because some shows, some movies do it, and it just kind of gets in the way. It feels forced. It doesn't feel natural. You know, unless it's like a Deadpool where obviously you know that that's the character. But, you know, sometimes it just feels like this is it's beating you over the head. And I think, and, you know, if you're watching this on YouTube, which we are exclusive to YouTube, drop us in the comments. You know, let us know what you think. But I think that this movie is so timeless because of this blending of character and actor, among the other things we've talked about. But that is something that's truly unique to this movie.
Yeah, really, the one thing that this is going to get brought up again after Star Trek VI, I really think they missed the boat, the ship, really, by not giving Sulu his own, even if it was a couple seasons of a Captain Sulu, and he was begging for that up until probably only like even 10 years ago. He was begging for that he should have had his own Excelsior series, and I really think he would have thrived. I think it would have been a great thing. Just like I think, you know, Michael Dorn at one point wanted his own Worf, like a Captain Worf series, which I actually think kind of turned into the Picard series in a sense, because they're kind of all getting back together. But he was even pining for that. And again, I think rightfully so, to kind of break away from the traditional captain, which I think Sisko did a really good job of. And I'm going to admit, I haven't seen a lot of seasons of DS9, so that's going to be one of the great things about this podcast, is it's going to push me to watch it. I've only seen 2 seasons of Voyager. That's going to push me to watch that. But I think that would have helped the franchise by getting away from your typical captain, I guess, is what we're kind of used to. Because really, Picard is a diplomatic version of Kirk, in my opinion. He's a softer version, which Riker was the Kirk of the Enterprise D. He was. That was Riker's role for a very long time. I even would have liked to have seen him have his own Titan show for a couple seasons. You know, they kind of got into this 7-season thing for some reason, which kind of started with Next Gen. I know I'm going off here, but you know, I still think it would have behooved them to have just given these guys even a couple of seasons to do something and just kind of grown it. Now, you get that with the books because you can pick up Titan books. I think there's Excelsior books with Sulu, so you can get some of that. And now I don't know if you saw, but in Star Trek, they brought back Sisko. He's got a ship. They brought back some next-gen characters as well and things like that. That's a great thing about comic books. You can do those kind of things. But I really would have liked to kind of go along with the idea of, you know, George Takei maybe being able to just play himself in a movie. I think it would have helped. It would have been a good thing to have seen that. So that's kind of.
I totally agree. Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I have heard some rumor that they might be doing a Captain Worf series, or also or a series with Jonathan Frakes as captain.
Okay. That'd be great.
Post Picard.
Okay.
I've also heard that they may be doing just a complete series post Picard with the Next Generation cast.
Ooh, I would watch that.
Yeah. So I think season 3 is going to be really telling. I mean, I know a lot of those cast members are getting up there in the years, but I mean, I think Patrick Stewart has proven time and time again he can literally do anything he wants and be perfectly good at it.
Well,
So,
and talk about a cast who embraced their roles. Like,
right.
they love their roles as next geners. They just, as Star Trek people, they do. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It's fantastic. And I think I think this movie, Star Trek 4, is where the next gen cast really leaned into it. You know, they had embraced it. Several of them had embraced it quite a bit, but you know, I think at that point that the movie came out, they had really started to lean into it. And through the process of the film and after the film with the post-production and the marketing, I think you see them transform into these characters, you know, pretty much for life. I mean, now they all went on to do other things, but it's inexorable at that point. Like they will never be differentiated from these characters. And even though they've tried to reboot and replace characters to tell other stories in different timeline or different realities, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, those characters are always going to be who they are. Now, I will say that Strange New Worlds with Cadet Uhura, so far I've been really impressed, and I've only seen the first episode.
Oh my God.
It's so good. And Captain Pike, first of all, Captain Pike wasn't really Captain Pike to me. You know, the pilot episode and the other episode, we all know where it's going to end up,
right?
But it doesn't matter because the process of getting there, the journey, it's the whole point. And I really look forward to it because it does get back to that exploration.
It does. Oh my God, it does.
Which, I mean, would be... That's the thing, is like, I like that they're doing the prequel series because it's interesting. And I think there's a lot of stories they can tell there.
Right.
I really want to see like a next generation where they are exploring again. You know, they don't have to necessarily break a ton of new ground, but there's still a lot that could be revisited. You know, and I mean, we all know that, like, was it the 25th or 26th century, people become like the time police. We know that there's stuff that they've kind of built out the universe towards that they could work with. But I was thinking the other day, where I do all my best thinking on the toilet, about how with Star Trek 4 being this time travel movie and pushing the frontiers of time, and then how Voyager, you know, goes through the Delta Quadrant, DS9 goes through the Gamma Quadrant.
Right.
What about getting a Beyond the Galaxy? What about Star Trek Beyond the Galaxy? We can't use Beyond because that's already been used, but like that would be the next logical step. Is like the Federation is now spread to all 4 quadrants. They've established ties basically everywhere, not necessarily fully peaceful. So you could have some galactic...
Still have your conflict, right.
But what about extragalactic? Intergalactic? You know, that's the thing that I turned over in my mind. I'm like, I'm sure somebody's thought of it. You know, at some point somebody's thought of it and gone, yeah, why don't we do this? And it's like, well, write me some scripts.
Right, know, like, if not, we trademark it. So
exactly. So hey, there you go. But you know, I think that's where Star Trek 4 does break that new ground, is that it introduces this new frontier of time travel that they really expound on in later franchises, and they've kind of beat that dead horse.
Yeah,
they do it again in Picard, of course, very successfully, I might add. But you know, this is the ground that's being broken 4 movies in. It's taking concepts and stories from the original series, but making it bigger and brighter and more important. And now we're moving into this frame of, what do we do next? There's only so many places you can go when you've explored space and time. And Star Trek 4, even though it's not a continuation of Genesis, it leads us right into the face of Star Trek 5. Now, I will say, without spoiling our next episode, I will say I really enjoy Star Trek V.
Oh my gosh, we'll battle on that one. Oof.
So it's fair. It's fair to say it's a weaker film comparatively to Star Trek 4. But I do think after this movie, what new frontiers are left for this crew other than Star Trek 5? And then, of course, we have to remember that in between Star Trek 4, 5, and 6, in that span of movies, Star Trek Next Generation launches.
Yeah.
And so Star Trek 6 has to tie in to Star Trek Next Generation.
Yep.
And so I know the traditional sense is like the Next Generation movies start with Generations. I would posit that Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, is really the first stone in that brick wall of Next Generation. So looking forward to our next couple of episodes here. And we've got Star Trek 5 on tap, and then Star Trek 6. Now, we did talk about, once we round out Star Trek 6, do we jump to Strange New Worlds and then roll through the original series? I think it's a fantastic idea. So are we still on board for that?
Yeah, we are, because that series, oh my God, it's amazing. So yes, that's the route we're going to go.
Perfect. So for all you listening here on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop us a comment. If you think I'm a little too gushy about this movie, or if you think we're not harsh enough, let us know in the comments. I'm sure we know Trekkies, we are Trekkies. Trekkies have a lot of opinions. I am entertained by all of them. I want to hear everything. Everything and anything, drop us in the comments. Head on out to our website, digitaleescapepod.com. You can hit us up there. We'll be putting out some blog material there where we'll probably talk more Star Trek and other topics, really. But one thing I would say is that, as we move forward with these Star Trek movies, keep in mind that there's a lot of territory to cover here. We are not going to run out of Star Trek stuff to talk about. The Warp Core is going to be going until those dilithium crystals break. And they're not breaking anytime soon. And we might be able to get some of that ambient radiation to infuse into
That's right.
Warp Core. We didn't even talk about the Warp Core. This is the first time the Warp Core isn't just exploding.
Right.
They have to fix these shitty dilithium crystals. Which, by the way, this comes up again. So, some Easter egg. This idea of fracturing dilithium crystals and having to somehow regenerate them comes up again with Mr. Scott in the future. So just back of that mind. Don't forget that, because that's one of my favorite things to talk about, is that particular instance where that happens. But I mean, that's kind of the territory I wanted to cross with Star Trek 4. Before we move into our little closing piece here, Lord Uther, I want to run it by you.
Yeah.
Let's just say, for example, you run a hobby shop. You sell lots of Star Trek memorabilia, toys, video games, movies, DVDs, VHS tapes, maybe, Blu-rays. If you wanted to, say, advertise online, and you needed to build a website, who would you go with?
Well, the easiest way to pique people's interest to come along and see all those wonderful products would to go with Peak Media. Michelle would do a wonderful job setting up your website, giving you different business advice, different SEO advice, getting your merch cart together. She will guide you through the process. She will train you. She's affordable. She's very fair. She is fantastic to work with. If I was going to start up a Star Trek memorabilia store, Peak Media, that's where I would go.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for an example of what her services can bring you, check out digitaleescapepod.com. I know I brought it up a couple of times, but we are really energized around this website. It is stunningly gorgeous. And, you want to level up, check out the digitaleescapepod.com. With that, again, we reached the end of another Star Trek movie, my friend. Any last thoughts on Star Trek 4?
I will not put cheese on it anymore. I will hold off on the cheese. Good movie. I like the way I like the way you framed it and you phrased it, so it's making me look at it in a different light. Let's see if you can do that for Star Trek 5. I highly doubt it, but
that's an uphill battle.
Yes,
that's an uphill battle. Don't get me wrong. I look forward to Star Trek 5. I'm going to rewatch it. There's a lot about that movie I do like. There is also a lot about it that I think I don't know how else to put it. I think is a little bit underwhelming.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
But I think we'll have plenty to talk about. That will probably be after the Christmas holiday and coming in towards the new year. We're looking at the closing out of 2022. We're only a few years out from Zephyr Cochrane. So hopefully the new frontier of 2023 will see many more Warp Core podcasts in your future. Again, we are exclusive to YouTube. You are part of a very, very privileged few if you're watching us on YouTube. Remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop us a comment or two if you'd like us to talk about a certain aspect of the movie or recap a certain topic, or maybe you have thoughts you want to share with us. We'd be happy to read them. We'd be happy to go over them on the podcast, as they come in. Drop them in the comments section. We read everything and respond to everything that gets dropped in there. So you will not go without being seen. We really value your time. We value your patience in sitting with us and coming with us on this ride, even when we're not sure how to follow that up. We are all for us Trekkies, and if you haven't, please check out the Digital Escape podcast. We are, of course, available here on YouTube, but we're also available on all your favorite podcast platforms. So if you don't have the time to watch more than the Warp Core podcast here on YouTube, please feel free to head over to Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Anchor. Am I forgetting one? I'm probably forgetting some.
We're everywhere.
And fun fact, we very recently debuted on Amazon Music. So if you have an Alexa smart speaker device, you can say, "Hey Alexa, play the Digital Escape podcast," and she'll do it. I did it today. And I have to say, it helped us get through dinner with a fussy 5-year-old. So with that, thank you all again for joining us on the Warp Core podcast. We value your time. We value you. Live long and prosper.